I'd heard my neighbor's driveway stay empty for 11 days before I finally said something to myself about it. That's not strange on its own. People travel. People visit family. But Walter Pruitt was 73 years old, and he didn't drive anymore, and the last time I'd seen him was a Tuesday morning when he was bent over his rosebushes in the front yard, wearing that same green cardigan he always wore, the one with the fraying cuffs he refused to replace. I'm not the type to get involved in other people's business. I want to be clear about that. I'm 51, I work from home doing accounting for small businesses, and my idea of a social life is a cold beer on the back porch after dinner. After my divorce 6 years ago, I built a very clean, very quiet life, and I was mostly okay with it. Mostly. The morning I finally knocked on Walter's door, it was out of guilt more than anything else. I'd been walking past that dark house every day, noticing the mail starting to pile up, and telling myself it was none of my business. But something about those untouched rosebushes bothered me. He tended them every single day. Every single day. No one answered the door. I checked around back. The gate was unlocked, so I pushed through, and that's when I found him. He was sitting in a lawn chair on his back porch, wrapped in a blanket, with a paper plate of crackers on the side table that had gone soft from the dew. He was awake, just sitting there. "Walter," I said, "you okay?" He looked up at me like it took him a moment to place who I was. Then he nodded, slowly, the way people do when they're not going to tell you the truth. I sat down on the steps and didn't say anything for a while. The yard was quiet. There was a bird somewhere in the oak tree doing something complicated. "You eaten today?" I asked. He thought about it. "Crackers," he said. "Those crackers are from at least 2 days ago," I said. He didn't argue with that. I went inside and made him a sandwich from what was left in his refrigerator, which wasn't much. Dilly turkey that was still good, some mustard, an apple I cut into slices because he'd mentioned once that his back teeth gave him trouble. I put it all on a plate and brought it out. He ate like a man who'd forgotten food was something he was allowed to want. While he ate, I looked around the yard. The rose bushes near the fence had started to go ragged. There were a few empty pots tipped over near the shed, and there was a padlock on the shed door that I was pretty sure hadn't been there before. "What happened to the shed?" I asked. His jaw tightened. He put down the apple slice he was holding. "Beverly happened," he said. I didn't know Beverly. He'd mentioned her a few times in passing, his wife's name, though he'd said she'd left years ago, long before I moved in next door. I'd assumed she was out of the picture permanently. She's not out of the picture, it turned out. Not even close. Over the next hour, piece by piece, Walter told me what had happened. He'd gotten sick in February, a serious infection that put him in the hospital for a week and a half. While he was there, Beverly had shown up. Apparently they'd never actually finalized their divorce. Some paperwork issue from years back that Walter had assumed was handled and wasn't. She still had legal claim to half the house, and while Walter was in the hospital, she'd had a locksmith come and change the locks on the shed, which was where he kept most of the things that had belonged to his late daughter, her paintings, her boxes of books, things he'd been holding onto for 15 years. When he got home from the hospital, the locks were changed. There was a letter from her attorney on his kitchen table, and she was nowhere to be found. "I've been waiting," he said, "for her to come back and tell me what she wants." "What does she want?" I asked. "The house," he said, "or money for her half, and she knows I don't have it." He said it plainly, without self-pity, which somehow made it worse. I went home that afternoon and made a real dinner for both of us. Chicken thighs I had in the freezer, roasted potatoes, some green beans from a can because that's what I had. I brought it over in a pot and we ate at his kitchen table, and he told me about his daughter. Her name was Iris. She died in a car accident when she was 34. He and Beverly had already separated by then, but Beverly had shown up for the funeral, and Walter had been too wrecked to think clearly about what was legal and what wasn't. And somewhere in that grief, he'd never gotten around to making the divorce official. "She's been waiting," he said. Waiting for the right moment. I didn't say anything about Beverly. I just listened and refilled his water glass and let him talk. That night, driving back across our shared property line, we didn't even have a fence, just a row of hostas that had gotten out of hand. I sat in my car for a while before going inside. I'm not a person who acts on impulse. I'm the type who makes lists and thinks things through, and sometimes overthinks to the point of doing nothing. But Walter eating crackers alone on his back porch for 11 days had done something to me that I couldn't quite name yet. I called my ex-wife the next morning, not for the reason you might think. We split up on decent enough terms and she'd gone on to become a paralegal, then took the bar exam 3 years ago and passed. She handles family law now, mostly, but she knows enough people. She listened to the whole story without interrupting, which is very unlike her. "That's a mess," she said when I finished, "but it's not unfixable. Can you help?" She was quiet for a moment. I can make some calls, she said. This is civil stuff, not criminal, so it's not my lane, but I know someone. Why do you care about this, by the way? What do you mean? You're very invested in your neighbor's legal situation. You've been next door to this man for what, 3 years? 4, I said. And you've never mentioned him. He minds his own business. I mind mine, and now you're calling me at 8 in the morning. I didn't have an answer for that. She laughed a little, not unkind, and said she'd make some calls. Her name is Vanessa, my ex-wife. We were together for 11 years. No kids, which was something we'd fought about for a long time and then eventually grieved together and then stopped talking about. When she left, she said she needed to build something that was hers, and I understood it even though it hurt. We still talked a few times a year. More since she passed the bar, actually. She'd call to tell me about a case. Or I'd call to ask her something about a client's situation. It was a good friendship built on the rubble of a pretty good marriage. She called me back 2 days later. I've talked to someone, she said. His name is Ellsworth. He handles property disputes. But I need to know a few things first. Does Walter have the original marriage certificate? Any documentation about the separation agreement? I'll ask him. Also, I said I might stop by. Is that okay, Vanessa coming here? I asked. She laughed. What, you think I can't make the drive? I live 40 minutes away. I know you live 40 minutes away. Then stop acting like I've suggested something insane and let me know if Saturday works. Saturday worked, I told Walter that evening. We'd fallen into a routine by then. I'd bring dinner over 4 or 5 nights a week, and he'd make coffee in the morning and leave a cup on my side of the hostas, which I thought was very dignified. He was a quiet man, but he wasn't a closed-off man. Once he decided he trusted you, he just started talking, and there was a lot to talk about. He'd grown up in western Pennsylvania, worked construction most of his life. His daughter Iris had been a painter, not a famous one, but a good one, and he kept her paintings hung all through the house. Every room had at least one. There was one in the kitchen of a mailbox in a field that I found myself stopping to look at almost every time I came over. Something about the light in it. Beverly has a painting of irises in that shed, he told me one evening. One she made the year before the accident. It's the one I want back most. We'll get it back, I said. He looked at me carefully. You don't know that? No, I said, but I'm going to try. Vanessa arrived Saturday morning with a box of pastries from a bakery I recognized, one near her apartment, and a messenger bag full of folders. She shook Walter's hand and sat at his kitchen table and, within about 10 minutes, had him going through a shoebox of old documents he'd retrieved from under his bed. She's good at making people comfortable. She always was. She has this way of being direct without being cold, which is harder than it sounds. By early afternoon, she had a clear enough picture. The divorce hadn't been finalized because of a clerical error, something with the county filing that had never been corrected. Beverly knew this. She had apparently known for years, had been waiting for the moment when Walter was vulnerable enough that she could use it. The house was owned outright. Walter had paid it off. But without the divorce on record, her claim was legally real. What are our options? Walter asked. Vanessa looked at him steadily. We can fight it, she said. It will take a few months, but the original separation agreement is here, and it clearly states her intention to waive property rights. The clerical error doesn't nullify that intent. What we need is a judge to see it that way. And if the judge doesn't, then we negotiate, she said. But I don't think it'll come to that. Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, There's a painting in that shed that belongs to me. That's what I care about most. Vanessa wrote something in her folder. We'll include that in the filing, she said. Recovery of personal property. That's straightforward. When we walked out to my car a little later, Vanessa stood on the sidewalk looking back at the house for a moment. He's been alone a long time, she said. Yes. She looked at me. So have you? I didn't say anything. She drove away, and I went back inside and made dinner, and that evening Walter told me about the year Iris painted the mailbox picture. She'd been going through something hard, a relationship that had ended badly, a show that hadn't gone the way she hoped, and she'd started driving out to the countrysides on weekends and just painting whatever she saw. Walter would sometimes go with her and sit in a lawn chair nearby while she worked. He said he barely spoke those days, just sat close enough that she knew he was there. That's good parenting, I said. He shook his head. I don't know about that. I just didn't want her to be alone. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa communicated mostly with the attorney she'd connected Walter with, the Ellsworth she'd mentioned. I stayed out of the legal specifics, but I drove Walter to his one appointment at Ellsworth's office, and I sat in the waiting room reading a 6-month-old magazine about fishing while Walter was inside. When he came out, he looked steadier than he had in weeks. Beverly's attorney had responded. She was requesting a buyout, a dollar amount that was significantly more than was reasonable but not insane. Ellsworth thought he could negotiate it down, and the original separation agreement gave them real leverage. If she pushed it to court, a judge would likely side with Walter. She's going to settle, Vanessa told me on the phone that night. She doesn't actually want the trouble. She wanted easy money. She's not going to get it, but she'll get something, and that'll be the end of it. Where does the money come from? Walter doesn't have it. You don't have savings? I thought about that. I have some. She paused. That's not your responsibility. I know, I said. Another pause. You're going to do it anyway, aren't you? I hadn't fully decided until she said that. But yes. She made a small sound that I couldn't interpret over the phone. It took another month. Beverly settled for an amount that was a quarter of what she'd originally demanded, signed off on the property agreement, and agreed to a court order releasing the contents of the shed. Walter's attorney filed the corrected paperwork with the county. The divorce, finally, became official. On the afternoon the locksmith came to open the shed, Walter and I stood in the yard and watched. It was early October by then, cool but sunny, the kind of afternoon that smells like dry leaves and something faintly burning somewhere in the distance. When the door swung open, Walter walked in slowly. I stayed outside. After a few minutes, he came out carrying a canvas, maybe 24 by 36 inches, wrapped in a moving blanket. He held it carefully, the way you'd hold something fragile. He didn't unwrap it right away. He just stood there in the yard holding it. And his face did something I looked away from because it felt private. We moved everything else out of the shed over the course of that afternoon. There were boxes of Iris's books, a crate of her art supplies, 2 more paintings, and a few pieces of furniture that had been hers. Walter knew exactly what everything was. He could tell me the story behind almost every item if I asked. I didn't ask about all of them, but I asked about enough. Vanessa came by that evening, which I hadn't expected. She brought dinner, takeout from a Thai place in town, and the 3 of us ate at Walter's kitchen table. And Walter unwrapped the painting and set it against the wall so we could see it. It was a street scene, a neighborhood in autumn, the light angled low, an old man walking a dog in the foreground. The colors were warm and a little melancholy and extraordinarily specific. You felt like you knew that street. She was really something, Vanessa said quietly. She was, Walter said. She really was. We stayed late. Vanessa and Walter talked for a long time, about Iris, about the house, about where he'd grown up. I mostly listened. At some point, Walter made coffee and brought out a box of cookies he'd had in the cupboard for who knows how long, and Vanessa ate 3 of them without commenting on whether they were stale, which they were. And I thought, that's still her. That's still exactly who she's always been. I walked her to her car when she left. It was nearly 10. Thank you, I said, for everything, the whole mess of it. She stood with her hand on the car door and looked at me. You know this is a strange situation, she said. Which part? She made a gesture that encompassed me. The house, the yard, the whole situation. You spent real money and 4 months of your life helping a man you barely knew. I know him now, I said. Yes, she said. You do. She looked at me for a moment longer than felt comfortable and then got in the car. She started coming by on Sundays after that. Not for any official reason. The legal business was done. She'd show up around noon, sometimes with food, sometimes not, and we'd sit in Walter's backyard while he worked on his rose bushes, and she'd tell him about her week, and he'd ask her questions in that quiet way of his that made you want to answer honestly. One Sunday in November, Walter looked up from his rose bushes and said, without preamble, "You two are very stupid." I looked at Vanessa. She looked at me. Walter, she said, he snipped a dead branch. I'm 73. I've been watching people waste time since before you were born. He didn't look up. Don't waste time. He said it pleasantly enough, like he was remarking on the weather. Then he gathered up his clippings and went inside to wash his hands, and Vanessa and I sat in the yard in silence for a long moment. So, she said finally. So, I said. She looked at her hands. I've been thinking about this for a while. Not because of what he said before. I've been thinking about it too, I said. I just didn't know if it was a good idea to say so. It might not be a good idea. No, I said. But Walter told me once that you can't get anything worth having without risking that it goes wrong. He was probably talking about the rose bushes, but still. She laughed. Then she said, okay, let's try. We didn't have a dramatic moment about it. We just agreed, there in Walter's backyard with the smell of October turning into November around us, that we would try. And then Walter came back out with 3 mugs of coffee and set them on the porch table without saying anything, and we sat there together, while the light went low through the oak tree. We got married 8 months later. Nothing big. Small ceremony at the courthouse. Dinner after at the same Italian place where we'd celebrated, the night I passed my CPA exam back when we were young and broke and wildly optimistic. Walter came with us and ordered the chicken piccata, and told a story about Iris's first apartment that made us both laugh so hard I knocked my water glass over. He was the one who gave the toast. It was one sentence. He raised his glass and said, "I found this painting in a shed, and it's exactly where it belongs now." Then he sat down and ate his chicken and refused to elaborate, and that was that. The Iris painting, the street scene with the old man and the dog, hangs in our hallway now. We pass it every time we come in the front door. Walter comes for dinner on Thursdays, and sometimes Vanessa picks him up on her way home, and sometimes I go get him, depending on who's closer. He's been teaching her how to tend roses, which is not going well, but she's stubborn and he's patient, and between the two of them, they're figuring it out. Last spring he found a small one of Iris's in a frame at a garage sale 3 towns over. Someone had bought it years ago at one of her shows and had no idea what they had. He paid $12 for it and called me from the parking lot, barely able to get the words out. It was a painting of a backyard, 2 lawn chairs, a coffee cup on a side table, and a long view over a fence into a neighbor's yard. It hangs next to the street scene now. I stop and look at them both, sometimes on my way to the kitchen in the morning before the rest of the day starts. 2 paintings by a woman I never met, in a hallway of a house that's fuller than I thought it would ever be again. I don't know what Iris would make of any of it, but I think she'd be glad her father isn't sitting alone on a back porch with a plate of stale crackers anymore. I think she'd probably like that a lot.